Hello, my name's Andy Whitehouse and I'm a member of the team teaching the Person-Centered Counselling course, the diploma and degree course through the Metanoia Institute. And today I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking to you about the Triad exercise, which is such an integral part of the shared learning weekends all the way through the course. To come through the course successfully, of course, requires an academic qualification. So it'll require a kind of intellectual understanding of the principles behind person-centered counselling, but also we look at your fitness to practice, and an awful lot of that will come out of your experience, your reflection on, your learning from your experience. Underpinning person-centered counselling, the person-centered approach, is the prime value of your own experience. Carl Rogers said, "Experience is, for me, the highest authority. The touchstone of validity is my own experience." Right, so there's Carl Rogers, and so for us, we're thinking in terms of the utmost importance of being able to be aware of our experience, of ourselves as an experiencing being, and to reflect on their experience, think about what's affecting it, what's coming in, what's coming up from within to shape us, and learn from our experience and move on. So the triad exercise offers us this in good quantity. So in the first year, it's your only experience of sitting in the chair as the counsellor. And in the second and third year, you're out on practice, but it's a chance to come back and reflect in a safe space on your practice and try some things out, see how you feel, save a space perhaps. And yeah, I've spoken to colleagues who've been qualified for many years who still find there's plenty to learn in a triad exercise if we're open to learn. So what is it? Well, the triad, as you would imagine, is a three-part exercise. There are three participants within it. There is a client, there is a therapist, and there is an observer. So what we all do then. So the role of the client is to find a suitable topic for raising in this therapy situation. It's much more effective to find a real experience than to role play one. So bring something real, but bring something that's kind of appropriate to the size of the situation. If you're on the course now, you will be moving either in personal therapy or looking to find a personal therapist. That's the place to take the big issues of your life, the core things that cause you distress, cause your anxiety, sadness, and so on. So we're looking for something that has a degree of those things, but isn't something that's kind of beyond the scope of the setting. So we need to be realistic about what we're bringing. The role of the therapist is to present yourself in a congruent way as much as is possible, and to offer the client empathy and unconditional positive regard. We'll have some definitions of these terms at the end of this little video. And we're also hoping to communicate the empathy and unconditional positive regard to the client. The role of the observer is to do just that, to observe. It's not to evaluate. It's not to say it was a good session or a bad session. We'll be learning some stuff about effective and useful ways of both gathering and sharing our feedback. But that's your role, is to watch. And again, lots of opportunities for learning through that, to looking at the interaction between the client and the counsellor. The counsellor is responsible for the timings, for the beginning and ending. Let's manage it just like you would in any other therapy session. So let's imagine we've got to the end of the session. Typically, a triad could last up to 20 minutes. But the timings will be agreed across the whole group of you within a teaching weekend. And then in terms of feedback, what happens next? Well, the observer goes first in terms of giving feedback, and they'll have 5 minutes in which to share with you their observations. As I say, we'll come back to this at the end and look at what effective means of providing feedback and gathering observations is. Then there's 10 minutes for the counsellor to think about what's going on for them, what happened in the session for them, what they were thinking, what they were feeling, what was operating within them, what was influencing them at the time, and how that might have affected their capacity to deliver those core conditions that we were just talking about a couple of minutes about. And finally, the client has 5 minutes to give some feedback. And this would be pertinent for this feedback to be about, well, what was my experience of receiving empathy and unconditional positive regard? Did I feel understood? Did I feel judged? How was it? When the counsellor said X, that impacted on me in this way. Okay, so there's the cycle of a triad. And we're going to move on now. I'm going to share my screen with you, and we're going to look at a little bit of stuff about how we gather our observations and how we offer feedback in a way that is useful. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen with you now. Okay, so here are some quotes. There's the quote on experience. And there's the quotes describing the core conditions. Including that one there about the communication of empathy and unconditional positive regard. The client perceives, at least to a minimal degree, the unconditional positive regard of the therapist for him and the empathic understanding of the therapist. There we go. So giving and receiving feedback. Let's have a look at this. Now, the Corb's model is a very useful tool for giving effective feedback. Let's have a look at this now. Corb's feedback is feedback that is clear, owned, regular, balanced, and specific. Be clear about what feedback you want to give. Being vague and faltering will increase anxiety in the receiver and will not be understood. And there's a lot of evidence to suggest that actually it can be really difficult to receive non-specific feedback. If someone says it was a great session, well, what was great about it? What was useful about it? We really need to know this is an opportunity for learning. We need to extract the learning, not just kind of stroll by it. So an example of clear feedback would be, I felt that your reflection missed the word loneliness that the client used. So as the observer, you might have heard the client say, I'm experiencing a lot of loneliness in lockdown. But maybe the therapist missed that. It's owned, it's your perception. This is your experience. There isn't an ultimate truth. It says as much about you as it does about the receiver. It helps the receiver if it's stated or implied in the feedback. So for example, I felt unsettled by your directness rather than you're too pushy. It's important to give regular feedback. It's more likely to be useful than saving up a bunch of grievances and delivering them in one large package. So if you've been in a bunch of triads with somebody and, you know, like you think, oh, they've always done this, they always do this. Well, it would have been better to have just shared it in the moment at the time. It gives somebody an opportunity to learn and reflect and learn from and benefit, and we all would need that. It needs to be balanced. Now, it's important to balance negative and positive feedback. It doesn't mean that for each piece of feedback you give, you must, even if you give some critical feedback, that you must give something positive. But over time, you're looking for a balance. So we're looking to encourage and draw each other on. Yeah, so we're looking to detect, as well as detect the things that we think were perhaps weaknesses or things that were missed. We're looking for things that are strengths too. We're looking in a kind of strengths-based way. Well, what was useful? What was good? And even if somebody is having a really difficult session and it's not working well for them at all, there will be something in there that you can draw on. And specific. So, as I was saying earlier, generalized feedback isn't informative. focus. Get your feedback on particular interactions or behaviors that you've witnessed. For example, phrases such as "your directive" will only lead to hurt and resentment. And everybody involved in this is feeling a degree of vulnerability. We can all feel uncomfortable being watched, can't we? So yeah, a specific statement that kind of makes sense is much more helpful. So as the example is here, a specific statement such as, when you asked 3 questions in a row about the client's mother, I felt you were directing the process. It gives the receiver something they can use, they can work on and think about, and a dialogue can develop from which you can all learn. And then I'm going to look at Kieran suggested this way as a way of for the observer of gathering feedback, observations related to feedback. Take your paper and fold it in half vertically. On one side, write, when you notice a meaningful message becoming apparent from the client, make a note of that. So the example here is, I always feel really nervous when my boss is on site, or there was the one about loneliness, I'm feeling lonely in lockdown. And on the other side, write down how the counsellor responds to these messages. Do they clock it? They might just miss it altogether, might not notice it. Is their response to when you say, I always feel really nervous when my boss is on site, to say, who is your boss? Where do you work? For example, and miss the nervousness that's expressed. Yeah, but remember, your recording is sharing observations and not evaluations. So an example might be saying to the therapist, you looked somehow uncomfortable when the client started crying, and not you got nervous when the client got upset, which is directive. You're offering observations for the therapist to learn from. So, and a last hint is, using this approach, is it'd be useful to ask the counsellor what they would highlight as a strength, or perhaps an example of their progress from the session, or one area they would like to develop further or would wish to have done differently, and why. So as you're the observer and you're completing your feedback, you could use that as an opportunity to kind of hand over to the therapist for their reflections and give them a starting place. Okay. And finally, there's the source of the quotes that we've shared earlier. Okay. So there we are. That's a little bit on triads. Thanks for watching, and I'll no doubt see you around.